It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Roel Seibring. But before that, I would like to introduce myself too. My name is Karen Olson. I'm based at the International Qualitative Research Network at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan campus. I will paste our email into the or our website, into the chat in a few minutes, or the Q&A in a few minutes, so that you can check it and then keep track of other activities hosted by our group. I respectfully acknowledge the Syilx Okanagan Nation and their people, on whose traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory UBC Okanagan is situated. I would also like to acknowledge that you are joining us today from many places, near and far, and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of your land. So Dr. Seibring is an assistant professor in the Faculty of Global Communications at Doshisha University in Kyoto, Japan, and a senior trainer with ATLAS.ti. His research interests include dialogic interaction and language learning, language policies in multicultural contexts, and qualitative research methodology. His most recent book, Dialogue in the Language Classroom, was published in June 2023, and it is based on discourse analysis of ethnographic data involving foreign language learners. Dr. Seibring also hosts periodic training sessions on the use of ATLAS.ti for qualitative data analysis and creates content discussing qualitative research methods for the ATLAS.ti website. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Seibring.
Well, thank you very much, Karen. Thank you, Ivana, and thank you for everybody who has taken the time today to join in this webinar. I'm looking forward to a good discussion of qualitative research methods, particularly discourse analysis. And we will be weaving the discussion of discourse analysis through the context of dialogic classroom interaction, which I'll explain briefly, but also to make an argument for the importance of systematicity in qualitative research. So with that, let's get started. So talking about systematicity, why do we need to systematize the social world? And the idea is to allow for transparency and consensus. When I talk about what makes, for example, a beautiful city, or what makes a dynamic conversation, what does that mean? And perhaps depending on the person, the definition might differ. And the important thing in qualitative research is for us to clearly define what it is that we are talking about in a transparent way. It's not, and ideally this would allow us to create consensus between people, and in the realm of research, between scholars. But if there's no room for consensus because we are all so different, then at least we have some acknowledgement about what other people's definitions of social concepts are. And so systematicity allows for that space. Ideally, a systematized qualitative research approach allows us to contribute to theory in a rigorous manner, and research rigor is an important component to qualitative research as defined by Tracy. There are, of course, critiques to this, and if you are in the more sociocultural, more critical, more social justice-oriented schools of thought, the idea of systematizing the social world can distort social reality, also exclude certain voices from scholarly discussion. It can also confound critical reflection, as in a blind faithfulness to methods and research rigor can preclude us from actually critiquing our own practices. And so there is space for taking systematicity to its extreme, to a fault, but it does have its purposes. But let's turn our discussion briefly to the idea of discourse analysis. Discourse analysis is when we look at what people say or write, but not just what meaning they are trying to convey, or what meaning is being said in the words, but also what do they intend to do when they speak or when they write. For example, if I were to write in all caps in an email in all caps, I'm trying to show that I'm shouting, or I might be angry at somebody. That's at least one intention. Or if I am trying to slow down my speech or use simpler words, then maybe I'm trying to make myself easier to understand. And so the whole approach to discourse analysis is to read between the lines and get underneath the face value of meanings to understand what people are doing when they use language. Of course, it is, as with many aspects of qualitative research, it requires subjective judgment and interpretation, which can confound systematicity in our discussion today. More specifically, we are going to look at dialogic classroom interaction. So if you can imagine your university teacher in a room full of 100 students talking endlessly without any input for 90 minutes in one long, unbroken monologue, perhaps the kind of teacher that we've all been used to. Dialogic classroom interaction is the opposite of that. Instead of me transmitting knowledge to you through speaking, like plugging a cable into someone's head and transmitting information, the idea is to use dialogue to draw out the students' ideas, to learn where they are coming from, and to diagnose or diagnose any gaps in knowledge, or co-construct knowledge with the student so that they come to a better internalization of knowledge. In some schools of thought, there is also dialogue can also help to create a more inclusive classroom. Instead of telling students, "Hey, you have the wrong answer. No, you need to do your homework. You need to study more." Well, the role of dialogue can be more welcoming. Under a Freirean school of thought, the idea is to take stock of where students are coming from and then building knowledge from there. So again, think of discussion and inclusion of voices rather than a straightforward monologue. And so, but the challenge of dialogic classroom interaction is that interaction is unscripted. It is unpredictable. When we become more knowledgeable and expert in dialogue, then we can kind of predict, kind of get a grasp of what people might say next, but it can never be perfectly predicted. And so if we're going to accept that as an integral part of teaching and learning, then we have to take all of the dynamics of social interaction into consideration. And so as we talk about the dynamic, unpredictable, fluid, etc. nature of dialogue, the question is, why are we systematizing theories of interaction in the first place? And I've already outlined some of the challenges. Interaction is dynamic. It can never be scripted. And for many reasons, but it's confounded by the situated nature of any social interaction or social behavior. And it depends on countless factors: someone's age, someone's gender, education level, income level, cultural background, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very difficult to easily predict what someone might say in interaction when we are dialoguing with them. So why are we trying to systematize? Because the objective is not to predict interaction or behavior. I think one of my favorite TV shows is The Mentalist, and the protagonist seems to do a very good job of predicting human behavior and what people might say or think next, and which is a very Hollywood construct. And it's and the goal of being an expert interactionist or an expert dialogic teacher is not to predict or create a script. But in order to understand intercultural communication in all of its dimensions, it is important to at least have a discussion on systematic grounds for how people speak, what they say, and why they say it. We may never get to a perfect form of understanding all of the varied combinations and plays and interaction, but a systematic approach is going to allow us to have at least a greater understanding, if not a perfect understanding, of intercultural communication. And of course, when it comes to perfecting, not really, but in terms of improving the craft of teaching and learning among practitioners, and in order to determine what practices might be more effective than others, then we have to have some sort of rigorous form of empirical knowledge regarding dialogic classroom interaction. So we're going to demonstrate this form of systematicity and a systematized use of discourse analysis through a study. So way back in 2019, I was fortunate to conduct an ethnography at a private university in Japan. Most universities in Japan, if not all of them, require English education for students in their first year, or if not before graduation. And so I was able to observe first year required classes at this private university in Japan. And it involves a teacher whose first language is English. And of course, all of the students their first language was Japanese. There are situations where students' first language is not Japanese at a university in Japan, but in this case, all 44 students' first language was Japanese. We will be analyzing the data through discourse analysis, basically questions such as what is the teacher trying to do when they interact with students. And we won't be looking at the lecture parts of the data because there are some parts of the data where the teacher just drags on and on. But when he's engaging with the students, what is he trying to do, or what is his objective? So we will be using various questions in discourse analysis and synthesizing it with a coding approach, which will give us the structure to the qualitative data that we need for analysis. I want to keep in mind that many of the transcripts are redacted. I had to convert a lot of the raw data for ethical considerations and truncate them into their most essential forms, while also protecting research participants' privacy and confidentiality. So keep that in mind, that this is a modified form of the project that is represented in my dissertation and in the book that Karen mentioned. For the purposes of today's webinar, I will be using the Accountable Talks sourcebook as the backbone for the theoretical framework that I will be using to analyze the teacher's practices. So O'Connor and Michaels are two of the key scholars in contemporary discussions of dialogic classroom interaction. They talk about classroom talk they talk about teacher practices as a series of talk moves. And so they've written various treatises on the subject of talk moves that are meant to foster dialogue and facilitate teaching and learning within the classroom in a way that engages and stimulates the interests of students. Resnick as well, they and Hall, but all of them have contributed to the larger theory of dialogic classroom interaction through their own approach called accountable talk. There are various approaches, but we will use the accountable talk approach today. With that in mind, why don't we go ahead and look at the data and do some data analysis, which is also a demonstration of ATLAS.ti and its various tools. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the project that I have for you today. And and please let me know if you don't see the ATLAS.ti screen. What I'm going to, as you can see, the project is divided into documents and codes. The documents represent our data through which the codes will be applied. And what I have over here from documents 1 to 13, these are various observation transcripts that I have, segments of classroom observations that I have transcribed for the purpose of today's webinar. And will be used to analyze today. Let me take a look at one of the documents. And so, as you just to show you a brief example, we have a transcript where the names are redacted except for T. T is for teacher, SS or S is for student or students. And then there are pseudonyms, which is code names for the various students. So what I want to show right here is an example of coding. In this situation, the two students, FS1 and MS1, they had to pair together in order to create a poster about Japanese customs. And they had to present that poster to the class. So this was a mini presentation in preparation for a larger speech unit. So what we have here, let's take for the most part, the students were presenting, and after that, the students give their applause. It's only after the presentation that the teacher interjects, gives feedback, as it were. So this mini presentation talks about going to a sushi restaurant, a conveyor belt sushi restaurant, where you just take the sushi from the conveyor belt, and there's certain manners that you have to observe when you go there, which is what they were presenting on. And most importantly, don't put the plates back on the conveyor belt when you're finished, because they needed to count and to determine the cost of the meal. And then the teacher, instead of saying, "Oh, very good, you did a great job," "Oh, let me correct your grammar," he does say, "Oh, if I return the dish, it's much cheaper." And it elicits some laughs from the other students and the presenters. And so in this case, this teacher move I have coded with the keyword responding. And so when I'm going to, if I click on edit, and so basically responding is not to necessarily to give some sort of assessment of how well they did or what corrections they can make, but responding as if it was a kind of a natural conversation. That way they can, as you could see from the students' laughter, the goal here is to put the presenting students at ease when they are after they have presented. Like they might be thinking, "Oh, have they done a good job? Have they made any mistakes? Or was their delivery not perfect?" But when the teacher, in this case, responds in this manner, it's to show that everything is normal. Everything is implicitly they've done a good job because the teacher is able to build on the presentation, as it were. So that is one example of the coding as applied to this document. As a brief example, of trying to understand where the teacher is coming from and what they are trying to do. I should back up and look at the source book, which I said was my theoretical and framework. And what I do is I was fortunate to get a copy of the source book and use it, which means that I can put it into ATLAS.ti and then I can code it. And so if I look, there's so many pages, but what I do here is look at the structure of the book. Stable routines and talk formats is one section of the book. But then we get into talk formats. What kinds of talk formats are there? For example, there is the teacher lecture, and there is, and so I have coded the section on teacher lecture and the whole description of it, because I might want to get to it later. So for example, if I show the quotations of this code, I can see the description of teacher lecture, so I can get a sense of what Michaels, O'Connor et al. Meant when they are talking about lecture. I think all of us have an intuitive idea of lecture, but it's really important to have a record in the project so that I can apply the code of teacher lecture appropriately to the rest of the data. And repeat the same process for the recitation, whole group discussion, other types of talk formats and hybrid talks. So as you can see, I have, if I have treated the source book as a theory, I can break down the theory into its constituent elements, such as the types of talk or what types of hybrid talk are present. And more importantly, we're getting into the section on teacher moves. And so these are, as you can see here, these are a variety of moves that teachers can use to ensure purposeful, coherent, and productive conversation. So think of it as what Michaels and O'Connor call talk tools. These are kind of the discrete instructional practices that a teacher employs to make a certain point or to achieve a certain objective. So for example, so the larger theory of teacher moves can be broken down into constituent elements, such as, for example, marking, which we'll see a lot today. For example, the teacher might say, that's an important point. So instead of saying good, or instead of saying, try again, in this kind of assessment form of teacher instruction, the teacher is in a way validating the students' ideas by saying, oh, I like what you said. That's an important point. Oh, that's really interesting. Did everyone hear what Samantha just said? And so on. So with that, I have, as with previous codes, I have applied this code to the relevant section of the theory for later reference. And I've created similar codes, such as what will be important today? Challenging students, like, what do you think? Or can you give me an example of that? Or can you tell me more about your opinion? So the idea is to not for the teacher to teach, but for the student to bring out their ideas in a way that might foster teaching and learning among students. And so we have other moves across this data. Accountability. Here's one: verifying and clarifying, because might especially be useful in a multilingual classroom context, because students may not understand each other perfectly, or the teacher may not understand what the student is saying perfectly. So it's important to verify and clarify. What other things are here? Pressing for expanding reasoning. Reasoning skills are a really important part of accountable talk in terms of fostering critical thinking. And we're going to show through this data that I have today that critical thinking skills are not a major component in the data that I've collected. Which may suggest a divergence from the accountable talk approach. that the teacher in this study uses. He doesn't intentionally use dialogic classroom interaction or accountable talk in particular, but he does. So we have one goal in mind of trying to identify how is it different, and maybe what theoretical developments can we derive from the data. So with that in mind, I have labeled all of the teacher moves blue. All of the teacher moves that we've created from this theoretical framework as blue. The blue will mark our existing theoretical elements and will mark any new developments as red. So, and you will see that over here. I'm going to go open the code manager and show you all of the different forms of codes. So we have created 4 different categories. So in a grounded theory or inductive theory, inductive analysis approach, we organize discrete codes into larger categories for richer analysis. And today we're going to focus on the teacher moves category, and we have various codes marked in blue and red. So I could, in ATLAS.ti, I can change the color if I want to. This is basically a visual aid to allow me to visually distinguish between the different sub-themes in my categories code of teacher moves today. So I've created new codes such as asking for contributions, eliciting details, expansion. And by the way, since these codes don't exist in the theoretical framework, I've had to define them on my own. And so I've created in the comment structure a brief description on what, for example, expansion means. Instead of expanding students' reasoning, I'm asking the teacher is asking the student to build on their utterance. Excuse me. The teacher is building on the student's utterance and expanding and giving more information, which may not be the target knowledge of the classroom, but it is important. It does validate their ideas further when when the teacher plays with the ideas more by inserting his own knowledge. Eliciting details, such as when the teacher doesn't know and needs to know more, which is a different nuance from verifying and clarifying. I want to make sure that it is different. I'm going to double click on the original quotation, that teachers can model and promote accountability by verifying or clarifying a student's contribution. As in, the teacher may not know what the student means. And so the code that we've created about eliciting details is maybe the teacher knows what the student means. He just wants to get more information, or he wants the student to talk more in the situation. So there is a nuance between these two codes that require separation and a new development in our proposed theory. And so with that in mind, let me close Code Manager and go into the one unmarked transcript that we have today. I have marked all of the different, let's look briefly. I've marked all of the different transcripts except the last one to give you an idea of the different kinds of things that the teacher says. Pseudonym Peter. I switch between Peter and teacher sometimes, but that's not his real name, by the way. But I can see once I through the existing codes, I could see that some of the codes are blue, some of them are red, and I can get a visual sense of how well, or the extent to which the teacher is aligning with the established talk tools or the established teacher moves in the source book, or if the teacher is pursuing other forms of dialogism, which are that are not in the source book, which are marked by the red in the codes. So this has been marked for all of the different teacher moves, except for the last one, which is totally blank. So why don't we go ahead and look at this together for a little bit. And so this transcript relates to a classroom activity where students are using a reading textbook. The reading activity is over, and now the textbook has some discussion questions that are kind of based on the reading, but allow students to open up with their own answers. So, for example, what should never be eaten for breakfast is one example of a discussion question that students had to answer in small groups. And then in this part of the transcript, the teacher is asking for answers and reporting, asking students to report on their answers that they had in discussion. So let's read this together. Paragraph 5. What do you think should never be eaten for breakfast? For example, I said before, strawberry jam on rice should never, which is a cultural thing. It's not strange in America, for instance, to have like rice as a dessert. Like rice pudding is white rice with cinnamon, sugar, and like cream. The students go, eh. So he's trying to interest the students or surprise the students. I'm going to go ahead and select this, right-click and press Apply Codes. And the idea here is trying to identify which of the teacher moves that are already coded so far in the project exist in this example. So in this case, the teacher is modeling. Modeling in this case is where the teacher is trying to give an example that can make students give answers more easily. So I'm going to click on that. In this case, he is also eliciting details because he wants to know what the students' ideas are. So at least in my estimation, you might have a different idea. But in my estimation, he's trying to elicit details through modeling. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. But right now, it looks like there isn't a code for drawing interest. Now, so the A over here is where the students are surprised or interested, and there are many instances where English teachers in Japan try to interest students in culture that comes from English speaking countries. And so for now, this is not part of our coding scheme, whether it's in the framework or in the new codes that we're creating. So we're going to go ahead and create a new code. Let's see. So let's just for the sake of discussion, drawing interest. I'm going to, again, that code doesn't exist. I'm going to add that. And because that's a new code, I need it would be nice to define it, because if somebody else wants to look at my data, they might look at the code and it's like, what is that? What does that mean? So I'm going to go ahead and add a comment. Teachers utterances to stimulate interest among students. Sometimes the code name might speak for itself, but we do want to make sure that we over document our codes so that they're easy to understand. So once we have that, we can go. So now that we have 3 different codes, and I want to color this red because it's a new development. Let's see. Let's see. But I've always wondered, why is sweets on rice, not in Japan, but sweet on mochi, which is rice cake, is okay. Students go, I understand. They murmur, nandaro ne, which means, yeah, why is that? So this is another example of the teacher trying to, we're past modeling now, so we're back to drawing interest in an attempt to elicit details. And now at this point, we see that this particular teacher move is not in the source book. It doesn't exist in the accountable talk approach, at least as provided in the source book. So right now we have more red than blue. Let's see if we can find another example. Anyone have a good example? What should never be eaten for breakfast? Yeah. this is later on in the transcript. We're going to apply the code for the appropriate teacher move. This person, the teacher here, is asking for contributions, as in without calling on a particular student, he is asking for a show of hands, which is an important skill in dialogic classroom interaction. At this point, it doesn't seem to be part of the source book as well, though. I'm going to add that to the codes, and so we'll go on. Let's get one more idea of coding. So it's ramen. Why not ramen? It's so oily. Teacher says it's heavy, something heavy. In the summertime, I can't eat tonkotsu ramen in the summertime, daytime, because I feel like I will sweat, white sweat. The students laugh. And I'm going, so why is the teacher, what is it, expounding on this answer? And obviously he is responding. In this case, he is marking the student's contribution as valuable because he is responding to the student's utterance, and he is using it to draw interest. And so as we have coded so far, I've gotten more red than blue. So I'm not seeing a whole lot of accountable talk, the strict view of accountable talk so far in this transcript, but I am seeing other forms of engagement with students that might be useful in discussions of dialogic classroom interaction. It just hasn't been discussed in the existing framework of the source book. Maybe other frameworks have. For the purposes of this discussion, I've only used one theoretical framework for simplicity. As you try to determine what gaps in theories exist, you should be looking at various theories. In this case, beyond the source book, maybe other treatises, maybe other books, other scholars, to come up with a theoretical framework that you can use to identify new developments as well as affirmation of existing developments. In this case, this is a potential for new developments in our theory of dialogic interaction. So that's the coding bit. We're going to get into the deeper analysis. So what I'm going to do is go to the code co-occurrence analysis. And so code co-occurrence is a matter of if two codes appear in the same segment of data, they are said to co-occur. And so we can use that to demonstrate a relationship by proximity. It's up to you as the human researcher to determine the causal relationship, but this can be a good start to determining those relationships. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of the blue codes, the existing codes. I should expand this a little bit more. There we go. And get a sense, and we'll cross that. Survey researchers say crosstab, or maybe cross-reference, but we are going to see if the red codes co-occur with the blue codes. And so as I do that, I am creating a table of codes that co-occur with each other. So we can do away with some of the columns, such as accountability, building on prior knowledge, expanding reasoning. We didn't see much of that, expanding reasoning, did we? Keeping channels open, linking contributions. Which one is this? Which one is this? Pressing for accuracy, pressing for reasoning. And as we do that, we are getting a simplified table. And so we can see that so far, with a small sample of data, I see that the number 5, for the cells that intersect, teacher moves marking and teacher moves eliciting details. Remember that marking is a form of validating the student's contribution. Hey, that's a good idea. Hey, did everyone hear what Samantha just said? And then eliciting details is, hey, tell me more about what you just said. Give me more information about your idea. And so I can click on that cell to get the relevant quotations that we've looked at. Special practice of taekwondo. Okay, why? Why is it special? So the teacher in this case is marking by way of saying, oh, you say special practice. Okay, tell me more. Why is it special? In this case, he is eliciting. The second quotation, cold or warm. Okay, serve cold or warm, because the student said warm, I think, for konyaku. And so he is the teacher is marking what the student said, but the teacher is also eliciting more to asking the student, hey, what is the texture of konyaku, which is a traditional Japanese food that is very gummy, but not sweet. It's more savory. But I digress. And so we see different examples where the teacher is eliciting and marking. And because of that, we can get a sense of a greater development of theory that synthesizes both an aspect of the source book's theoretical framework and a new development that we have created. So eliciting and marking, it seems to be a combination move in terms of encouraging the student's contribution and asking the student to contribute more, because up to this point, hey, you've done a good job because you have a good idea. I want to hear more about it. And with that, once we've used code co-occurrence to draw out this potential idea, what I can do is go back to the code manager. And what I want to do is take this code. We are looking at marking and eliciting details. Select them both at once, and then right-click to create a new smart code. And we have to give a name for this. I mean, we could say marking eliciting. Let's see. Encouragement of dialogue, which I think is a synthesis of these two codes for now, for the sake of discussion. And I'm creating this smart code based on these two codes right here. And encouragement of dialogue, I want to confirm, edit the smart code, must match all of the following rules, that it must have eliciting details and marking in the same quotation. And so once I have that, as you can see, there are 5 different instances, which matches our code co-occurrence. And so I could use this. I'm going to go ahead and change the color to purple as a brand new synthesized development of theory, which I can use later on to discuss in my write-up of this research. And so I know I'm getting short on time. I want to leave some time for questions. There is, and so so far we've talked about coding, code co-occurrence, smart codes, and then one more for let's see. There are some parting slides as well. I want to create a network based on, let's go over here and say that eliciting details and what was our marking. And so what I want to do is create a link between these two. And because of code co-occurrence, we know that these two are associated with each other. And now that I have the encouragement of dialogue, I'm going to drag this into my network and see if I can, and see if I can create a link here. Excuse me. What I want to do is move this here and say that teacher eliciting details is part of encouragement of dialogue, and then marking is part of encouragement of dialogue. So I can through this discussion, I can create a visualization that will be easy for my research audience to understand the various phenomena within the classroom interaction. Wish I had time for a more complex network, but hopefully you get the basic idea of the need for visualization, which is predicated on which requires systematization of our discourse analysis. So I'll go back to my PowerPoint to close up. And so, so what have we learned from this discussion? Accountable talk does seem to focus primarily on critical thinking, meaning making, but it doesn't seem to focus on eliciting students' ideas beyond reasoning skills or beyond getting supporting information on the knowledge that they contribute. It also doesn't seem to account for the language learning context situation where students may not always be understood, where teachers may not understand students or students may not understand each other because language is a challenging endeavor. There is also a school of thought in dialogic interaction regarding validation and inclusiveness of student contributions that accountable talk through the discussion of this data analysis doesn't sufficiently provide emphasis on. If we were, and these are preliminary insights, as we expand the data set, and this data set is truncated for the purposes of this webinar, but hopefully supporting data from this ethnography can provide further evidence to these preliminary insights. So there are some methodological considerations, which is why we're all here. Some of the tools in ATLAS.ti, such as code co-occurrence and the network view, are really useful for identifying variations in our theory and to visualize the elements of the theory for our research audience, and in a way for ourselves as well. Other tools in ATLAS.ti, such as code colors, category codes, and comments, are useful as visual aids because ethnographic data can become so large that it's really important to organize it in a systematic way so that not just our audience understands, but that we understand it later on. So some final thoughts before I take on questions. Systematicity it is about keeping a reliable record for ourselves and for our research audience. And hopefully used in the right way, it is not about bringing rigidity to a dynamic world. We want to take into account all of the various variations of social interaction and behavior, but that should not preclude any discussion of creating a rigorous system to allow us to explain our theory of social behavior and interaction. It's important that in order to draw empirical insights in qualitative research, we need a reliable record. Again, not just from our audience, but for ourselves. And that so that we aren't relying just on instinct or anecdote to say this is what we know. Because ultimately, the question that our research audience will always ask us when we deliver actionable insights is, why do you know what you know? And a rigorous system it is what we need to rely on in order to show a record of why we know the things that we know. So hopefully hopefully that broader discussion will allow you to think more empirically, more systematically about the phenomena in your qualitative data, and on a more street level, it gives you some idea of how to use the tools in ATLAS.ti to conduct qualitative data analysis and draw rich insights from your data. So this has been a 45 minutes has been a very short time, but hopefully this has given you a few good ideas for your research. So with 10 minutes left, I'll pass it back to Karen and Ivana for questions and answers. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Saibing. That was really great to learn about the research as well as ATLAS.ti. And speaking of systematicity, We do have perhaps some relevant questions here. In particular, yes, so okay. So in particular, we have one question about the codes and how you created the code system. And so in particular, did you pre-create or populate a list of codes, or were you co-developing codes as you continue to analyzing, or was it a mix of both? Perhaps you can talk a little bit about the process of creating the codes throughout your research.
Absolutely. So, at the beginning of this study, at least the demonstration of this study, requires a theoretical framework to because dialogic classroom interaction is well sourced. It's there are various theories on it. We take one theory and then we represent that theory through a series of codes, and so that involves looking through the existing theory, which was our source book, and look at the various and identify the various teacher moves, the forms of talk, etc., and create codes from there, as you saw when we looked at the PDF. So that creates a base of codes as a starting point for the data analysis. Once we do that, remember that coding is an iterative process. And so as we get into insights that the existing theory may not account for, we use our inductive reasoning to create new codes. We say, what is happening here that cannot be accounted for by the existing codes? And so we will create, so at least for this kind of study, we take an existing framework, have an existing set of codes, and then create codes along the way, and then organize it, create new ones, delete ones we don't need, and reorganize, etc., until we have some preliminary insights that we can advance.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's the beauty with qualitative analysis, is that you can move between both the kind of theory-based or deductive codes and then also the inductive codes to combine both.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then along the way during the presentation, there was some questions about the codes as well, or perhaps more comments than questions, but just talking about the sort of establishing the definitions or boundaries for applying a particular code. And so it seems like the theoretical concepts provided these kinds of definitions or boundaries. And as well, some very positive comments about your use of colors on the codes, that it was a great way to distinguish the voices in the research and using the blue and the red codes. So to immediately notice new ideas that weren't part of the original source book.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, certainly, yeah, lots of interesting comments about working with the code system, and it's great you got to show that in ATLAS.ti. And then you can also maybe see in the chat, yeah, a few comments thanking you and yeah, appreciating the
Appreciate
presentation.
it. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
And,
yes, if anyone else has any other questions, feel free to pose them now. Yes, and great, you could see the use of the code co-occurrence. Yeah,
absolutely.
so Dr. Siving did a great example with that. Also a question about seeing the recording of this, and indeed we will share the recording, and you'll also be able to find it in the near future on the ATLAS.ti YouTube channel, as well as on the IQRN website. So Dr. Karen Olson shared that link in the chat, so you can see, as well as recordings of previous sessions from the IQRN. And then you will also find this one there as well once we have that uploaded and published.
Right. Absolutely. So. So I think I'll just make one comment that this is as useful, even if you find the tools or the application of these tools useful, the discourse analysis and coding is a very descriptive process. So this is one way of doing discourse analysis. I think where when I was studying for my PhD, the the structure of discourse analysis was not as rigid. It is more about fostering discourse analysis. During my PhD years, was more about discussion of discrete instances. So, and that has a useful purpose as well. And because the anecdote of one case is also useful for further inquiry, but if the goal is to try to develop some more generalized theory of social interaction, then there does need to be some system in place for which is represented by codes and the tools that we've created, that tools that we've used in ATLAS.ti.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's true that it's great that qualitative research can be very interpretive and really go into depth even on just one sort of source of data, if you will. But absolutely, that systematicity, it's important to convey, right? It's not that qualitative research is less rigorous somehow than other forms of research. It's quite the opposite. But yeah, we can. So it's great to see that you could share some practical advice around that and achieving those goals.
Glad it was useful. I hope
Great.
it's useful for everybody here. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And everyone's saying it was too short and they're looking forward to seeing you again. Well, good news is that Dr. Seibing does give some free webinars as well. You can see that on the ATLAS.ti website. I'll also put that link here in the chat so that you can explore all the different trainings that we offer.
Right.
And yeah, absolutely. We'd love to see you again, or you can always reach out to Dr. Roel if you ever have any questions.
Absolutely.
Well, that,
I'm sorry, we are meeting again next week. IQRN is meeting for another webinar on grounded theory. That is at 1 a.m. Japan time, translates to noon Eastern in the US, if my math is correct, 9 a.m. Pacific. So if you are if you're interested in grounded theory, please join us this time next week. You can I believe Ivana wanted to show the trainings page, which is where you can sign up.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. I am putting the link as well for that specific session also in the Q&A here, so you can also click right there to register. Yeah, we'd love to see you all next week.
Absolutely.
And I just want to also thank you so much for all the great insights, Dr. Roel. And we hope everyone enjoyed the presentation and perhaps got some new ideas for your own research. So remember, if you ever want to learn more about using the different powerful tools of ATLAS.ti, you can explore all the resources that we have on our website. We have these webinars. We also have video tutorials and premium trainings and manuals. So a lot of things that you can explore there. And so keep an eye out for that email that we'll send with more information after the session. And of course, feel free to always reach out to us if you ever have any questions or comments. But on behalf of ATLAS.ti, we're very happy and honored to be partnering with the International Qualitative Research Toolkit at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan, and to be able to bring these webinar series. So we hope to continue seeing you all in future sessions.
Right. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.